Hey there, country fans. Today we're heading down the untamed back roads of country music to explore the life and legend of Tompall Glaser, a farm kid from Nebraska who brought grit and soul to Nashville, opened his Hillbilly Central studio, and helped spark the Outlaw movement alongside names like Waylon, Jennings, and Willie Nelson. If you've ever wondered who forged that raw, unpolished rebel sound, well, Tompall was right there at the center of it all. Buckle up because you won't want to miss this journey into pure country spirit. Tompall Glaser was born on September 3rd, 1933 in Spalding, Nebraska, into a large farm family that included 6 children. He grew up in a world of wide-open fields, early mornings tending livestock, and the comforting hum of gospel harmonies echoing off the kitchen walls. His parents, Louis and Marie Glaser, worked long hours to keep the farm afloat. They were devout, quiet-spirited people who encouraged their children to sing in church and at home, so music became part of the household routine long before anyone imagined a professional stage. As a young boy, Tompall was drawn to the emotive style of country performers on the radio, and he had a particular fascination with the songs of Hank Williams. There was something in Hank's lonesome cry that stirred Tompall's imagination, hinting at the possibility that music could be more than just a pastime. By the time Tompall reached his early teens, he and his brothers, Chuck and Jim, were harmonizing on hymns and fiddling with the popular country tunes of the day. Tragedy struck in 1948 when Tompall was 15 and his father died unexpectedly of a heart attack. Left without the primary breadwinner, the family turned to their shared musical talents to help supplement their income. Tompall's mourning took the shape of determination. He saw how performing could not only honor his father, but also keep food on the table for a household that had lost its center. He, Chuck, and Jim soon began entering local talent shows and performing at county fairs, forging a trio known informally as the Glaser Brothers. They quickly earned a reputation for striking vocal harmonies that blended the warmth of brotherly closeness with that rural gospel style they had grown up singing. The pivotal moment came around 1950 when all 3 brothers competed in a local radio station's talent contest in Omaha. They won, and news spread that these young men from a farm had voices that could mesmerize an audience. Emboldened, they set their sights on reaching a bigger stage. By 1957, the Glaser brothers were convinced they needed to move to Nashville, where the country music scene was centered. That same year, they signed their first recording deal with a major label. Their initial single, titled 5 Penny Nickel, was released in 1958 and went nowhere in sales. However, it was a start, and it led to them backing established country acts in various touring circles. They spent time traveling with a prominent performer known for wearing black and captivating audiences everywhere he went, and this gave them invaluable live experience. Soon enough, the trio's dedication began to pay off. Their tight harmonies and unpretentious stage presence appealed to country audiences craving sincerity. In 1959, they landed a spot on a popular network talent program showcasing what separated them from countless other acts, a crisp, brotherly blend reminiscent of the best harmony duos in American music. The exposure was significant enough that the group began receiving more substantial invitations, and by 1960 they were no longer with their original label, but had switched to another that saw potential in them. A year later, the Glaser brothers cracked the top 10 on the country charts with a single about the ins and outs of love, revealing that they could tell a heartfelt story in 3-part harmony just as well as they could belt out a rousing honky-tonk tune. Not long after this initial chart success, they became official members of the Grand Ole Opry, the long-standing institution that symbolized making it in Nashville's country music world. Week after week, they performed before devoted crowds, wearing sharp suits and addressing the audience with a slight Nebraska twang that, while unflashy, spoke to their authenticity. Their brotherly bond, and the tensions that can come with it, played out quietly behind the scenes, but on stage, they projected a unified front. In 1966, they scored a notable success with a country single, climbing to number 2, followed by a 1968 recording that showed they had crossover potential. Some artists later made that same song a pop hit, which illustrated the commercial possibilities hidden in their repertoire. Meanwhile, Tompall's personal journey had him itching to explore outside the standard Nashville production framework. Over time, Chuck and Jim displayed an inclination for more mainstream country, while Tompall started gravitating toward an edgier style. Creative differences smoldered beneath the surface, even as the group gained more recognition. By the early 1970s, Tompall sensed that he needed to forge a separate identity. In 1973, the Glaser brothers disbanded, a decision partly fueled by Tompall's growing desire to find new paths and partly by the strain of some personal issues he had been battling, including alcohol. After the breakup, Tompall struck out on his own. He opened a recording studio in Nashville, informally known as Hillbilly Central. Nestled in an old house, this studio would become a gathering place for musicians tired of the highly commercial, overly polished approach that dominated Music Row. Certain renegade voices in country music, figures who would later be called outlaws, felt free in Tompall's environment to create albums on their own terms. During this period, he collaborated with a lean, wild-eyed singer whose rebellious flair and desire to push boundaries matched Tompall's. Together, they recorded an album that signaled a seismic shift in the country music world. The project was more stripped down, more in tune with the dusty roots of honky-tonk, and less reliant on showy arrangements. After that, word spread in the scene that Tompall Glaser was a creative ally for any artist seeking to break from the shackles of standard industry practices. Another turning point arrived in 1975, when Tompall himself had a single that served as an anthem for contrarian fans who disliked radio's repetitive fluff. It became an anthem for those who found mainstream country too sanitized. His raw, growling voice on that track was a shot across the bow, telling the suits that artists wanted to sing what they wanted, how they wanted. Then came a collaborative album in 1976 that burst through all previous sales benchmarks for a country record. It featured a handful of now iconic performers, and Tompall's presence among them underscored his central position within what people began calling the Outlaw movement. The album soared, becoming the first country project to achieve platinum sales, and it introduced an entire audience to a style that seemed rebellious, organic, and thrilling. Tompall's contributions to that success were sometimes overshadowed by the bigger stars on the record, but insiders in Nashville and many fans recognized that the album would not have been the same without his spirit. Behind the scenes, however, Tompall still struggled with addiction, which had played a part in driving him away from a more stable life with his brothers. By 1980, he managed to overcome his alcohol dependency, a personal victory that coincided with a short-lived family reconciliation. In 1981, the Glaser brothers reunited, performing again as a three-man unit that showcased the sound that had first brought them to the Opry stage. Their harmony was as tight as ever. They saw immediate success with a new single that shot to number 1, 2 on the country charts, reassuring fans that sometimes old magic can be recaptured. But behind the smiles, the old tension still simmered, and by 1983, the group parted ways once more. Tompall returned to the studio environment, producing various projects and releasing the occasional solo work. In 1986, he put out what would be his final album, an effort that met with limited sales but remains beloved by those who admire his genuine style. Throughout his career, Tompall was also navigating personal twists. In 1955, he had married Joyce Martell, and they had a son named Tommy 2 years later. The pressures of life on the road and the long separations took their toll on the marriage, leading to a divorce in 1965. A couple of years later, he married June Johnson. She stood by him as he built his studio empire and battled the demons of alcohol. Their marriage endured until she passed away in 2002, and though they had no children together, they maintained a private life away from the constant swirl of the Nashville rumor mill. Meanwhile, Tompall had lost another brother, Bob, to cancer in 1969. The grief he felt from that loss was something he rarely spoke about in public, channeling it inward and letting it color his musical sensibilities. Time marched on, and in 1999, Tompall received an honor in his home state that validated the respect Nebraskans still had for their local boy who'd broken through in the big leagues. But as he aged, new challenges arose. In his later years, he showed signs of memory decline. By around 2009, it became clear he was suffering from complications related to Alzheimer's disease, and family members stepped in to care for him. He died on August 12, 2013, at his home in Nashville, age 79. His passing was subdued, with the family opting for a quiet farewell. They scattered his ashes back on the farmland in Nebraska, where he had first learned to sing with Chuck and Jim, completing the circle that took him from a dusty homestead to sold-out music halls and back again. Friends from the country music community paid tribute in their own ways, acknowledging the understated role Tompall had played in shaping a corner of country music that embraced honest storytelling over slick production. Though he never reached the same level of name recognition as certain famous outlaws or mainstream headliners, Tompall Glaser influenced far more than people realized at the time. He'd racked up nearly 30 charted singles across various incarnations of his career, alongside a collection of #1 hits. One hits credited to him and the Glaser brothers in select country markets. His combined record sales were said to be in the millions, impressive for an artist who consistently preferred to remain behind the scenes, letting the music speak for itself. He was also the impetus behind a legendary studio where free-thinking artists could cut tracks without the meddling of label executives. Through all of it, he carried himself with an unassuming coolness. Colleagues recall a man who could be soft-spoken yet also fiercely insistent on doing things his own way. He believed wholeheartedly in the artists he worked with, giving them a sanctuary to record songs that might not have passed muster with the more conservative elements of the industry. The best example of that is how quickly his studio became the go-to spot for a generation of maverick musicians. The place felt like a secret hideout where outlaws could talk shop, pin tunes that criticized hypocrisy, and jam until the sunrise. It was there that sounds emerged that propelled country music toward a new identity, one that was less about sequined suits and more about denim jeans and honesty. When people ask why Tompall's name doesn't surface as often as some of his contemporaries, longtime fans point to his preference for letting others claim the spotlight. He was a behind-the-scenes facilitator, a sounding board, a friend who would jump into a jam session and push it that extra step. Yet the more you learn about the outlaw movement, the more you see Tompall's fingerprints all over it. He fostered a spirit of creative defiance that made it possible for certain artists to record landmark albums without the typical corporate influences. He also recorded songs that highlighted his own gruff vocals, giving the outlaw era some of its sharpest lyrical edges. Even though he is not as frequently mentioned in casual talk about outlaw country, the key players themselves always credited him as an essential part of their success. For those who listened closely, Tompall was never entirely in the shadows. He had a small but loyal following that appreciated his willingness to speak up. He lamented how industry players often valued money more than heartfelt artistry. He also lamented how formulaic the radio playlists could be, calling for a more organic approach to discovering and promoting talent. In some corners, he was considered a troublemaker for these views, but for the creative community hungry for authenticity, he was a friend whose door was open. Many older country fans treasure vinyl pressings of his solo projects and collaborations, seeing them as mementos of a golden age. Decades after his passing, the echoes of Tompall Glaser's life story linger in the soulful twang of a steel guitar or the raw honesty of an outlaw ballad. Younger generations occasionally stumble onto his recordings or watch interviews featuring certain country legends who speak of him with respect and warmth. They discover that behind that name, maybe not as famous as Waylon or Willie, was a figure who helped pioneer an entire movement. And it wasn't just about the rebellious image or marketing angle. It was about forging a space where genuine artistry could flourish without fear. That's what Tompall's life amounted to, a deep belief in music's power to shake off constraints. In many ways, it's fitting that Tompall spent his last years in relative quiet, battling an illness that chipped away at his memories. The man who once welcomed outcasts into his studio never seemed to crave the glitz that comes with big awards or chart records. He found satisfaction in the knowledge that the artists he supported were changing country music from the inside out. Even though he faced personal struggles, losing family members, divorces, and addictions, he remained a steadfast believer in forging one's own path. The private memorial after his death matched that ethos: minimal public display, maximum authenticity. Close friends and family spoke of him as a free spirit who never forgot the lessons of a Nebraska farm boy upbringing, who never caved to the typical star-making machinery that so often polishes away the rough edges. Long after Tompall Glaser's final note had been sung and his ashes had been returned to the Nebraska soil, country music persisted in evolving. New subgenres came and went, but the fundamental debate about artistic freedom and label influence remained. In that debate, Tompall stands as a symbol for those who want to carve their own niche, unafraid to reject the path of least resistance. Even those who never met him personally sense that his presence helped shape a moment when country music got a little wilder, more untamed, and infinitely more real. He lived through an era that transformed him from a farm kid shyly harmonizing in a church choir to an elder statesman of an outlaw movement, all the while forging an unspoken alliance with listeners who yearned for something genuine. And in that transformation, he wrote his name in the annals of country music, ensuring that as long as songs about heartbreak, rebellion, and grit are sung, Tompall's spirit remains alive in their chords and words.